Welcome, everyone. I'm Chris, head of developer relations here at Mapbox. This session is behind the scenes of Mapbox Satellite imagery. And just so you know that this session will be recorded, you can actually check it out in the Zoom lobby immediately after this session is over. So if you want to catch up later in the week or rewatch or send it to a friend, they can watch it in that lobby, and then it'll end up on YouTube in a couple weeks. Captions are available. Just use that Show Captions button in your Zoom interface, and you can choose multiple languages. When you do submit questions, we welcome questions from the audience. We'll try and leave some time at the end for them, but use the Q&A feature. It helps us keep things a little more organized. If you ask questions in the chat, we might catch them, but Q&A is better. Lastly, you can discover all of our build sessions throughout the week in the Zoom event lobby or at mapbox.com/build. We have over 60 sessions in this event. We're halfway through them, but lots of really great content so far and lots more to come soon. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Morris, who's a geospatial software engineer on our raster team. I'm really pumped for this because I think it's very easy to take for granted. Just turn on the satellite layer, and he's going to give you a little peek behind the scenes that it's simple for us, but not so simple behind the scenes. Take it away, Bill.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I just want you folks to see a quick overview of what I'm going to try and get through here. There is actually a lot of material to cover. If I'm going to do the complete history of the Mapbox satellite base map and what we're doing with it today, how we create it. The place that I'll start is, of course, at the global view. And I'll just use this as an opportunity to say, so I work on the raster team. At Mapbox, that is a group of individuals who focus on data where the basis is pixels. In a lot of cases, it's remotely sensed data, but not always. And my particular purview within that group is the satellite imagery. There are a lot of things that come to mind when you say satellite imagery, and we have sort of honed in on a very specific thing. This is optical imagery, the sort of thing that your eyes would expect to see if they were looking from above. And just keep in mind that as I discuss Mapbox Satellite as a product, as a base map, as a context, I'm mostly focusing on that sort of thing, the sort of true color, what we expect the Earth looks like from above. But I should say I really love doing this job in particular, particularly doing the sorts of stuff where some folks might consider it a little bit tedious, but I actually really love the quality assurance and quality control work of checking individual locations as we build this map. Because it allows me to just go on this endless tour of the world. The world is, the planet is just deeply fractally complex. There's always going to be new stuff. There's always going to be places that you've never been. There's going to be perspectives on landforms in the Sahara. There's going to be crazy, moving from side to side glacier processions in Alaska. There's going to be land tenure patterns where people put protected areas in a perfect circle around a volcano in New Zealand. The divisions between the extremely salty and the slightly less salty parts of the Great Salt Lake. There are really interesting perspectives to be had on things like natural disasters, like this, really slow landslide in India. There's, lithium mining to be observed in parts of the Atacama Desert. But I think what I really enjoy doing is backing out and seeing when the Earth is just beautiful on its own. And you can really start to see patterns of how, geology works, but also patterns of how humans form the landscape. For example, in the Netherlands, where they are one of the largest impacts on the landscape and have really, really distinct ways of forming their own views of the world. The Mapbox satellite base map runs from really densely populated islands in Karachi Harbor at sea level all the way up to the summit of Mount Everest. It covers militarized, difficult borders where there's a lot of visible human tension, and it can cover, a perfect day in the park, like this spot in Poland where we're at a position, we're now so close to the Earth. Our perspective is so detailed now that we can even read the sort of the individual moods and expressions of people based on the body language and their shadows. Um, we have this entire perspective because it's something that is extremely useful to our customers in a bunch of different ways. But I personally have the great benefit of being able to sort of curate this and to see all these things in the course of making it whole. So with that, I'm going to get a bit into the history of how Mapbox Satellite came to be. And then, as I mentioned before, I'll proceed on to sort of how we put it together. So before there was a Mapbox, even there was TileMill, which was a an early attempt at making maps on the web look really beautiful and be very easy to produce. The tiled mapping paradigm is not a new thing. It had been around for a while at that point, but something that the progenitors of Mapbox did when they developed TileMill was really bring it to as many developers and even lay users as possible. Um, the interesting thing about TileMill for me, because at the time I was not a member of Mapbox, I actually only joined about 4 years ago. But back in 2010, when TileMill was launched, I started using it almost immediately, and it was just the aesthetic possibilities of it were really amazing to me. You still had to provide your own data. There were sort of extracts from various sources. There were the types of things that I was using as remote sensing and GIS analyst myself at the time. But TileMill made it really easy to style those things in a beautiful way and then chop them up into these individual little these sort of web deliverables that form the basis of web mapping that we know today. Um, this was really advanced technology for the time, but again, you had to provide your own data. Um, Fast forwarding a bit to like 2013, 2014, Mapbox as a company made its initial name by providing a continuation of those tools that were available in TileMill, but also providing a ton of data behind it. In the first years, that was based on OpenStreetMap data and a bunch of other sources. They were doing a really good job of collating those things and then serving them as Mapbox vector tiles into this app styling and web mapping application called Mapbox Studio. Looks a little bit different now, is no longer a desktop application, but something that became apparent almost immediately was that there were places all over the world that didn't have these sorts of OpenStreetMap based vector and thematic elements. So around about 2012, just before the launch of this, Mapbox started forming a satellite team, and the initial members were tasked with putting together something that would provide context anywhere in the world. So in keeping with the sort of open data theme of Mapbox at the time, that began with Landsat data. Landsat is a amazing program of the USGS and NASA. It's been going continuously since 1973. There are basically every 1 to 3 days, every place on Earth has been imaged by a Landsat instrument since 1973. So it's just a huge amount of data available there, a bunch of sensors possible, but really the ones that the initial Mapbox folks were concerned with were the red, the green, and the blue channels, or the things that would produce an image that looked like what an astronaut would see from above. What was great about Landsat data is that it had global coverage, it was very consistent, but it wasn't super sharp. If you get in fairly close, you wouldn't really be able to see much detail. The pixels there were between 15 and 30 meters each. So really you might be able to see a house in a Landsat image, but not much more detailed than that. So to work with that as well, to sort of address that, the Mapbox Satellite team also compiled imagery from the National Agricultural Imagery Program. And this is a program of the USDA, still ongoing, where every 3 years or so, an entire state will be collected with orthophotos and a combination of funding through the federal and state governments. But what's nice about these is that these go in resolution down to between 0.5 meter and 1 meter each. So you start to see some details here. You start to see, boats in Vernon Park Harbor. You start to see the individual rows at Soldier Field. It's not as super tight as what we might expect spy satellites to be showing, but that's not really the point. The point here is that we could provide a bit more visual context, a bit closer to the Earth, and particularly in places that were high traffic for us, which initially, of course, was the United States. Um, that approach had some limitations. The first one, obviously, and the biggest, is clouds. If you look at the Earth from above, you're never going to see a view that has no clouds in it. This is just an example of 367 individual MODIS captures. The MODIS satellite is also, a coarse resolution one out about at the Landsat orbit of the British Isles. And as you might guess, the British Isles are very cloudy places. There are only a few times in each year where you can get a clear look at the pixels of the land underneath all the clouds. But something that some of those early members of the Mapbox Satellite team were able to do was to composite all of these together, and over the course of a year, pull out for each location, each pixel on the ground, find that one date that was not cloud covered. And as a result, they were able to do this all over the world. This was a fairly novel technique at the time for cloud removal, and produce a cloudless atlas of this MODIS and Landsat data, and increasingly of the data below that. So this is the basis of the Mapbox Satellite base map. You see it when you load our maps for the first time, but something that is conspicuously absent here is clouds. And it's because of that really advanced cloud removal technique that was first used all the way back in 2014 and really began to be the foundation of some of the innovation that the Mapbox Satellite team has been able to pull off. The limitations of open data hit us probably starting around 2014. Basically, we had access to that NAPE data I mentioned. We had access to coarse resolution global satellite data. But really, we need detail everywhere. We want everyone on Earth to be able to see that NAPE resolution, that half-meter coverage. So over the course, starting in 2014, and then over the course of the next half decade, we assembled a massive amount of satellite coverage through a combination of purchases and open sources. Our primary vendor for most of our detailed coverage of the world is Maxar. Our first purchases, they were initially known as Digital Globe, but by 2020, we had purchased 137 million square kilometers of 50 centimeter resolution satellite imagery from Maxar, which covers the entire planet. So basically anywhere on Earth, you're going to be able to see that level of detail at this point. There are additional purchases that we've made as we've gone along. I'll get a bit into what some of our criteria are for selecting new imagery and for picking places to update. But the other big shout out that I want to give is to the European Union and its open data programs. I should say places like New York City and Vermont in the United States and New Zealand and a few other locations around the world also have excellent open data programs. But in Europe, the amount of really detailed imagery that we're able to obtain through their open data programs is astonishing. It's the entire land areas of France, Spain, Portugal, Czechia, Switzerland, Netherlands, Denmark, large chunks of Germany and Poland. And there are others that we actually haven't even, haven't started to access yet, though they're out there. These sorts of things, in combination with the purchases that I mentioned earlier, allow us to have a comprehensive coverage, detailed global base map. The way that we sort of picture, where we want to be getting all this data, it varies, but there are two primary concerns that we have. The first is, where are people requesting individual tiles from Mapbox? And this is tiles of any kind, whether they're vector tiles for navigation or raster tiles for satellite base maps. What you're looking at here is, an approximate map within a particular time window of all the places that people are requesting those tiles from. And you can see it looks kind of like a global population map in some ways, but there are some significant deviations from that that give us some sense of prioritization, but also a sense of where we might be missing some basic coverage and people might not be seeking it out. The other factor that primarily we weigh when we're looking for new updates and new imagery, either purchases or open data, is the vintage of the imagery. And this is real patchwork, but what you can see here is that some places have much more recent imagery than others. The darker blue is a much more recent acquisition of imagery versus the yellow stuff that's getting pretty old. And there are some real patterns of availability to this as well. There are any number of reasons why we're not able to get every location on Earth all the time updated up to the current day. The first reason I'll just say, as mentioned before, is clouds. There are sections here, like in parts of China, in parts of Brazil, and in the Congo Basin that are cloud covered almost year round. And it's really difficult to get a look that's close not only to the present day, but to the present year. But one of the other reasons that it's pretty variable what we have access to is we're not the only customers for satellites. The sort of deal that a lot of private satellite operators have with the governments that permit them to operate is that those governments tend to have priority over tasking and data access. And those of us in the civilian world are much further down the pecking order. So we're able to get sorts of data that is much more, second tier in the sense of like it's not up to the minute. For the most part, that is fine for us. I think most of our use cases don't require up to the minute, and as a result, we're able to do a lot more with the way that we knit our map together. So the result of all of this, of course, is that we have, as I mentioned, coverage at all levels, from continental scale all the way down to, this in the bottom left here. This is the Montreal Botanical Gardens. You can sort of see a huge amount of context here where you wouldn't necessarily be able to get that from vector and thematic elements in maps. In the top right, you don't necessarily have a thematic view available of where these glaciers are flowing or what the particular arrangement of the topography is. Those are things that can be provided by imagery in this way. And in the bottom left, you can get clues about the ground and the goings on based on the number of cars that are parked there, the particular orientation of shadows, the seasonality based on the leaf cover, the particular paths that people are taking. All of this stuff is something that imagery really gives you a view into in a way that thematic and vector types don't. And that is generally what we try to provide with the Mapbox satellite base map. So the way that this is produced is it's evolved a bit over the years. There is a lot that goes into it. I'm just going to do an overview of steps we take when we bring imagery on board, and we ultimately want it to be available to our users, our end users, in the smallest and fastest available package, which is those tiles that I mentioned earlier. So first, I'll just mention there are multiple kinds of imagery that we're working with here. They're acquired two different ways. The first is satellite imagery. So this is from instruments that are in orbit around the Earth. That tends to be a polar orbit, so the sort of thing that is swinging around and around and has, as a result, a fairly high speed, fairly high revisit rate. But it suffers from that problem I mentioned earlier, which is it's outside of the atmosphere, so clouds are between the land and the satellite instrument. This is made up for a little bit by the fact that it is going so frequently, but it still is a significant problem for satellite acquired imagery. The other type of imagery that we get is aerial imagery, and this can be either from instruments mounted on planes or drones, flown much closer to the Earth, and typically under cloud level, or ideally on a clear day. the level of detail that you can obtain with these is significantly higher than with a satellite instrument. Satellite uh, satellite sensors, as much as we would like to think that the CIA is able to read, a newspaper from space, there are really hard limits to the resolution that you can obtain from a satellite-mounted sensor. And that tends to be in the neighborhood of about 30 centimeters per pixel. If you deorbit a satellite and let it burn up and get pictures while it's burning up, you can actually get better than that, but that tends not to be very cost effective. But if you're flying a plane or a drone really close to the ground, you can get resolutions as high as like 5 centimeters per pixel. So that is, really close to the ground. The image I showed earlier of those folks in the park in Poland, that was aerial imagery flown very close to the ground and with an astonishing level of detail when it's produced. The disadvantage of aerial imagery is that it's much more expensive. The difficulty of getting a plane to fly swaths over the same area that a satellite can cover, once every 3 days, it's pretty significant. So, if possible, that's why we lean towards satellite imagery as the basis of our detail globally. But significantly, we obtain aerial imagery wherever we can. So one of the things that goes into this imagery once we obtain it, it can come in a number of different formats. GeoTIFFs are pretty common, but also JP2s, any number of things. We're pretty agnostic about what we work with. But the initial thing that we deal with is that the notion of true color is very subjective. And any number of remote sensing folks will tell you that there's no such thing as true color. That the Earth looks a little bit different depending on how high the sun is, depending on what the atmosphere looks like. And the idea that there's like an absolute view of something is not entirely accurate. But we do try to aim for a certain amount of consistency. And that view of what we expect the ground to look like varies from place to place. Geographic context is one of the really big motivators for a lot of our tool sets in ingesting and incorporating imagery. Just to use an example here, you can see these are two images from the same collection. The same plane and instrument flew both of these on the same day, but you can see that there are significant differences in the shadow orientation because time moved on from when the plane was over Cologne Cathedral on the left here and when it was over more the countryside on the other side of the river on the right. But also there's just some significant color differences in what we expect from a city versus the countryside. There's more blue and gray in the city, and there's a lot more green out beyond that. So when we attempt to bring in a new source of imagery, we have to consider the geographic context as we go. Some of the members of the Mapbox Satellite team years back developed a series of color adjustment tools, which allow us to get in there and really like move things around and tune until we have what we think is the appropriate balance. This is still an open source tool set. If folks are interested in using it, it's called Rio Color. This basically allows you to adjust a series of luminance parameters in any sort of raster data that you bring in, typically 3-band RGB data, but this allows you to adjust contrast, to adjust saturation. It really lets you fiddle with the underlying distribution of like the histograms of the imagery. Now, if we were to do this for every pixel that came in, it would take a really long time if just this sort of manual fiddling. So we've developed a few tools on top of Rio Color that allow us to sort of automatically merge things. So what you're looking at now is a process called Z-Blend, which was developed by the satellite team to try and prevent that jarring change of imagery when you go from one type to another as you're zooming in. So along the top row here, you can see as you go from zoom level 13 to zoom 14, getting closer to the ground, suddenly at zoom 16, it's completely different imagery. And that's true. at first you're looking at satellite imagery from Maxar, and then on Zoom 16, you're looking at aerial imagery from a state-based orthophoto program. There are some real significant differences here, and I will just say the biggest is probably seasonality. It's clear that on the left, it's summer, and on the right, it's either spring or fall. But that doesn't change the fact that it's a little bit aesthetically jarring to get closer and closer, and then suddenly, bam, it looks like you're in a different place. So we have a tool called ZBlend that is deployed on all of our imagery globally, where as you zoom closer, the two sources, sort of the endpoints of the two sources, merge steadily. So when you go from Zoom 13 to Zoom 16 on our map now, you'll actually see that these change as they go. And ultimately, you're not looking at a jarring transition from Zoom 15 to Zoom 16. You have a blended one. Actually, as I'm saying this out loud, I realize we have this deployed globally up to Zoom 13, so it's merging the global scale MODIS and Landsat data down to the Maxar data. But this is something that we're still in the process of deploying for the zoom levels you see here. So it's in parts of the world, but not others at the moment. Another color tool that we use is something we developed to match an entire selection of imagery to what is already there in our base map. As we get updates, we want to try and keep the change minimal. We want the changes that are visible in this map to be things that have actually changed on the ground, like new buildings or new roads, or changes in what's planted in a field from one year to the next. But when you have the original base map imagery, that you see on the left, and you're trying to replace it with the next one in on the right, you can see that the new imagery is a lot brighter. Maybe the contrast is lower, the exposure is higher, and that is a bit of a jarring change from what was there before. So we have ensemble color balancing formulas that will take all of the imagery in an entire collection that we've brought in and find sort of like the minimally invasive color formula from that will work with Rio Color, and then apply that to all of the imagery so that you can see the one furthest right is what will actually go onto the map, and it is considerably closer to the one furthest left than that initial source. So we have some automated methods, but ultimately we have to do a lot of eyeballing to figure this out. This is an aesthetic product ultimately, and we want it to be we want to be sure that it looks good. And just sort of turning the color balancing machines loose on the planet is not exactly a position we're yet in. Sometimes we get it wrong, and sometimes there's really no way around it. What you see here is just the edge between two different imagery types. There's, I think, two different types of orthophotos. One is Spanish and one's French. It's right along the border. And ultimately, there's just certain differences between instruments and how they collect imagery that we really can't balance. And this is not a problem that's unique to us. This is the sort of thing that you'll see in Google, in Apple, in any of those other imagery products as well. It's really hard to piece together a global mosaic from a bunch of different sources. We focus mostly on what the high quality is, and so we have to accept occasionally that there are going to be some imperfect balance across distance like this. Once we have sort of figured out the color that we want, we also mosaic against any pre-existing imagery that we have for a particular location. So when a source comes in, we basically put it in a big stack with everything else that we've had from that location before, and then we composite all of it. In this way, if there's some no data locations, like spots that are just empty or not covered by an incoming amount of imagery, they'll be backfilled by the most recent of what's there before. So we have an intake process that goes through sort of a combination of automatic and manual color assessment and correction. We also have this compositing phase. All of these things come together in what we call Pixel Monster, which is our imagery engine. This takes all of these sources that I've mentioned, and it ultimately creates these tile sets that are served at maximum speed. The process that this goes through, of course, data is collected. It is moved into a queuing system that we have. We're able to run this in a very broadly distributed system. So at times we'll have thousands of individual imagery files being processed simultaneously. And all of these individual operations are applied as these units are moving through the Pixel Monster ecosystem. So there will be reprojection, there will be mosaicing, there will be that color correction I mentioned before. And the output is just a series of little WebP or PNG tiles, 512 pixels on a side, very portable, rarely more than like 200 kilobytes. And those are the things that get sent really fast. There are, I'll mention that there are, other ways of accessing raster data in a moment here, but I want to point out that the real power of Mapbox, I think, has always been the accessibility and the speed of services. And the way that we distribute this imagery is so fast that we don't really we don't really intend to change it. Like there's just to give you a general sense of how the raster tiles API works. This is what serves our imagery. We have requests come into the endpoint, and we also have all of this imagery sitting in object storage, and we have a cache in front of it. This cache is probably one of the better used and more robust ones I've ever seen. About 70% of our incoming requests hit something that has already been cached and can be served incredibly fast in a matter of milliseconds. And then, if it hasn't been, and they go back to and the API goes to the object storage for it, it still is quite fast because it's already pre-cut. All of this pre-processing is very appropriate to a global imagery base map. There are definitely other types of data that it's not appropriate for, but what's really neat about global imagery is that it lends itself to being chopped up, subdivided into these raster tiles in a way that is still incredibly fast to serve. So that, I think, is sort of the overview of how we put things together without going into like really belabored detail, but I'm happy to take any questions about that toward the end here. But what are some of the use cases? So something that I mentioned before is that imagery provides context in a place where vector and thematic elements aren't necessarily available, or where they can be augmented by having that greater continuous sense of what's underneath. Just as an example, in looking at Cape Town here in South Africa, you can see where sort of cliffs begin based on color. You can see the different crop types based on the patterns of the fields. You can see where forests are. These are things where thematic data for those might exist, but they make for a very busy map unless you're actually looking at what seems to be a view of the planet from above. Imagery really provides that contextual power, and a lot of our customers are able to use that in really interesting ways. I take, for example, Watch Duty, who I think they're going to be speaking as part of Build a little bit later, but their application for providing alerts and information about natural disasters and emergencies, that is really augmented by satellite imagery, because in a lot of cases, if you're looking at in this case, a wildfire in a really remote location, there's a lot of stuff that you just don't know about what's underneath. They've got thematic elements like the extent of fires, they have administrative boundaries, they have peaks and some POIs. But what's really interesting also is the shape of the terrain and the coverage of the land underneath it. And the imagery can provide that additional context that is helpful both to Watch Duty and their contributors, but also to end users. There are features that can be identified and extracted from imagery, from our imagery in particular. The example I'll use here is the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team has for many years used Mapbox Satellite and other sources as a way of identifying the basics of what's on the ground in places where the map is not very well built out. In Haiti in 2010, when there was a significant earthquake there, the initial attempt to respond to that was really hampered by the lack of good map data. And the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team really they had already existed before that, but they really got off the ground by uh, using imagery and tracing houses, tracing roads for the responders to use. They were able to develop methods for damage assessment in some cases. And what's really interesting about that is the many different proxies for human activity you can get by looking at this imagery and by tracing individual things like buildings. You can get a sense of how many people live in an affected village just by tracing and then counting the number of buildings. You can get a sense for access based on roads. These are sort of manual methods that I'm describing, but over time, the humanitarian street map team and others have developed automated methods of images, of feature extraction from this imagery. And as it happens, we do this internally as well. So the Mapbox team has a number of products focused on HD roads. So the sorts of things that heads-up displays and navigation with rich directions require are specific locations of most road markings. So, for example, where something's a dotted line versus where something is a do not cross line versus where something is a train track. So our team, through a combination of automated and manual methods, pulls this stuff directly from Mapbox Satellite as well. So we have sort of external clients and internal clients as well using this imagery to provide context and to build more features. There are some interesting things that pop out when we look at how people use Mapbox Satellite generally. The first is that people really like looking at the detailed view. So of this, just over the course of a week, we pulled the number of requests at each Zoom level globally. And you can see that there's fairly consistent interest in the global, the continental view, but the real area of focus is Zoom level 17. And that tends to be the sort of place where you're seeing things like individual houses, individual cars. You're really getting down to a human scale of a landscape. And I think that says a lot about how our applications are used. Another thing that's worth pointing out is this look at global Mapbox satellite usage over the course of a different week. And initially, I wasn't sure if this was planes or like shipping traffic or what. Why are all these lines emanating from the middle of the world? But a colleague of mine pointed out that a lot of our users have applications that initialize at 0 degrees latitude, 0 degrees longitude, which we sometimes call null island, and then pan to the user's location from there. So what you're seeing is just a million app views going from 0, off to wherever the user requests. So there's all sorts of interesting things you can infer from this as well. But it's always just fun to see how people use this product. So Mapbox Satellite is never finished. We're always trying to improve on a couple of things, and I'll just say that primarily those things are resolution. We want the map to be more detailed. So in this example of Molson Stadium in Montreal, up until last year, this was the view we had of it, which is not horrible. It's fairly detailed, but this was satellite imagery at 50 centimeter resolution. And then last year, we upgraded that to aerial imagery, and you can see so much detail now. You can see how many people are in the stands. You can see the arrangement of the teams. You can see, particular ways that shadows are cast and get a sense of sort of the urban topography from that as well. We're always trying to improve resolution and looking for better sources as we go. We're also in a constant battle to improve recency. So this is an area in Las Vegas, which we've noticed is probably one of the places that changes faster than anywhere else on the planet as far as the human landscape is concerned. But this is what we had on the map until last year, obviously something under construction. And then we added aerial updates and we have Hilton Resorts World. So things are constantly changing on the ground. The best way I could describe it is that a pixel is out of date the minute it's captured. And so the best that we can do is be constantly attempting to update this thing. It's never going to be a finished product because the world is never going to stop changing. And the best that we can do is attempt to capture it as it goes in areas that are of greatest interest to our users, in areas that are of greatest geomorphic interest. The other aspect that I'll mention is that, so I alluded to this earlier, raster data is a polyglot. There are many, many different types. The one that the type that we've been focused on here is just what we might call true color imagery. And we're looking at that for context clues, but there are all sorts of other raster data types. An example that I'm showing here is weather data. So this can come in forms that are much more complicated than optical imagery. So instead of 3 bands representing colors, you can have 145 bands representing individual time steps of something like, atmospheric water vapor. All of these things are really fascinating and essential mapping tools, I think, as we move into the next generation of applications. And Mapbox has been developing a raster tiling system and format for much more complicated types of data like this. And I will use this moment to shout my colleague Jake's session, which is going to be tomorrow in the same time slot. That will give you an overview of how to use the raster Mapbox tiling service. There are a bunch of cool ways to incorporate data like weather data, but also hyperspectral data, thematic data, and I think that that's the sort of thing that is frequently seen as the next step in where a raster is going. But the imagery is always going to be there. We're going to continue providing Mapbox Satellite as that baseline of context. And, I'm going to keep getting to see really cool and interesting places around the world. I think that's about it. Chris, do you have anything to add on that, or?
No, I mean, it's a tough act to follow. So no, nothing to add. Just want to say thank you. That was a whirlwind tour, and I think from the history lesson to the technology involved, I think we're all. My hair is blown back. I think maybe I can speak for people who are watching this. Every single thing you covered could be like a whole 1 hour session on its own.
Yeah, I feel a little dazed as well. I apologize to anybody who that was too much. But yeah, hit us with questions.
Yeah, there's a few already been asked. So I'll start with I'll start with an easy one. Is it possible to display the date and time of the imagery being viewed? I think this one actually comes up quite a lot in a lot of our online channels. Is there any way people can know what they're actually looking at when they're using Mapbox Satellite?
It does come up a lot. It's true, and understandably so. I think that for the moment, the answer to that, unfortunately, is no. We do attempt to keep detailed metadata on all of the sources, but it's the sort of thing that is constantly changing and subject to different motivations. And we also simply, don't have the API infrastructure up to provide that sort of access yet. It's something that is on our roadmap, but we don't actually have a timeline for it. So yeah, I'll answer that with unfortunately a disappointing no.
Next one, are the aerial images open source, bought, or exclusively produced for Mapbox? I think the answer is yes to all three, but I'll let you answer it.
Yeah. No, I think there's probably very little data on this map, very little imagery that is exclusively for us. And if it's exclusively for us, it's probably because like one of my colleagues managed to get a drone flight out and capture his backyard or something. But for the most part, we're purchasing from public vendors who are also able to sell to others. We have fairly good deals with at the moment our aerial imagery provider is Vexel. They have excellent coverage in the United States and Europe. And I know they do sell to other folks, but I think we're their primary global base map customer. But as far as the open source imagery is concerned, I'll again just rave at how wonderful it is that there are such open data programs out there, and encourage anybody to grab some of that data and play around with it, because it's in one form in the Mapbox Satellite base map, and you can actually do many different things with it. In a lot of cases, there's near infrared. You could do vegetation indices. You can do all sorts of explorations. So praise the open data sources and go out and use them.
Awesome. One user or one viewer is asking, are data from different times of day also available? Your 5 meter, sorry, your 0.5 meter detail and closer make me think of how light influences activity or use of spaces at different times of day.
Totally. I will say this is not really under our control. The satellite-borne instruments tend to have a bunch of different considerations, mostly cloud cover for how they're able to obtain. Orbit has something to do with it as well. But the really detailed stuff, the aerial imagery, it tends to be hampered by the fact that in cities, in urban environments in particular, they don't like a lot of busyness. The folks who are flying it, whether it's ultimately for open source distribution or for purchase, that imagery tends to be flown like dead of the morning on a Sunday. So there are some circumstances, like in that Polish imagery I showed earlier, where it's mid morning by the time the plane gets over there. So there are people around, but for the most part, we don't have any control over what time of day, and it tends to be early morning when things aren't happening.
I think they were getting at, can we access different times of day for the same location? And I feel like maybe one of the hardest things you have to do is condense each part of the world down to one single picture that describes it,
Yeah.
when there could be many different ways to look at the same spot, right?
No, and that's a really good reminder. Mapbox Satellite is meant to be the best possible look of, at the world as sort of a baseline. It's not meant to be variable in that way. So it's the sort of thing that we've explored, coming up with products that allow you to have multiple dates of a particular location or multiple resolutions, and that sort of stuff is also on the roadmap. But at the moment, Mapbox Satellite is a single tile set representing the world, and we try to get the best balance we can.
Awesome. And really, this is actually important, and I'm curious the answer to this too. We often receive feedback for remote areas in Canada that the satellite imagery is too old compared to other providers. Is there a formal process for users and developers to request an area be updated? Is there anywhere that there where people can thumbs up an area that needs more, or how do they get that demand to you?
We do not have. We basically don't have that system right now. Something that would be ideal would be a full-on tasking system, and that goes into the roadmap item that I mentioned earlier, where if we are able to produce, or if we're able to offer multiple types of imagery for any given location, that's where we'll have the ability to also request specific updates and types. But for the moment, I think. Uh, with apologies, we don't have a like that regular thumbs up request map. The best I can say is that we are aware when our pixels are aging, and we do the best we can to update them. Remote areas of Canada, many apologies. We know, and we're working on updates.
Okay. Thank you. And as you move to more 3D, do you plan on including street view type imagery? That's probably a whole other can of worms, but any feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, if that's a reference to the sort of like immersive view that you can get as you get closer to the ground, yeah, there's a lot that our excellent maps and cartography team are working on in terms of how to sort of transition from the imagery view down to a ground level synthetic view, because there's a lot that you can do to make that synthetic view look like the imagery behind it. But we don't have specific. I will say we don't have specific plans as far as like a street view level thing. I would definitely check out the navigation products that we have, because those are probably the closest to that sort of ideal.
Great. So again, all of this, all of you've given us a glimpse behind the curtain of like all of this work that goes into maintaining this, a picture of the entire world at lots of different zoom levels. All of it gets condensed down into a single little tileset URL that you can just drop into a map with very little effort. And I like to remind people like that's the work, right? We maintain this global base map and all the great styling, then we maintain this global satellite image, so you don't have to think about any of that stuff, and you can just drop it into your app and go. So thank you so much for giving us this peek behind the curtain. And thank you all for attending. And I hope you learned something and are as fascinated as I was at this presentation. Thank you so much, Bill.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap. We'll see you at the other sessions in Build. Take care.